This is Grenfell's idea, and the kids have been practicing in Sunday school, and Sophia's stepped in at the last minute.
Then the Lord God formed the man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And the man became a living creature. And the Lord God planted a garden in Eden in the east. And there he put the man whom he had formed. And out of the ground the Lord made to spring up every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. The tree of life was in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying,
You may surely eat of every tree of the garden, 17, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it shall you surely die.
Now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman,
Did God actually say you shall not eat of any tree in the garden?
and the woman said to the serpent,
You may eat of the fruit of the tree in the garden, but God said, You shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden. Never shall you touch it, lest you die.
but the serpent said to the woman,
You shall surely die, for God knows that when you eat of your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil.
So when the woman saw the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate. Then the eyes of both were opened, and they knew they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves loincloths. And they heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. But the Lord God called to the man, and God condemned them for what they had done. Then the Lord God said,
Behold, the man has become like one of us in knowing God.
Therefore the Lord God sent him out from the Garden of Eden to work the ground from which he was taken. He drove out the man, and at the east of the Garden of Eden he placed the cherubim and the flaming swords that turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life.
Well, I just want to share with you today some of the thoughts that I've been having about the beginning of Genesis. We've just heard it read very well, actually. We've heard it read and given to us by the children, some parts of the beginning of Genesis. When we look around the world, I don't know what you think, but I'm looking particularly at places in the Middle East, where it really must be the most awful place to live, if you can live, with all this terrible violence going on, and the Islamic extremists carrying on the most appalling atrocities. And then you've got all the illness with the Ebola thing and various other illnesses that are throughout Africa and other parts of the world. And then we come and we can look at our own circumstances in this country where on the face of it, everything is lovely and rosy. We're going out enjoying ourselves because that seems to be the big thing of today, to enjoy oneself and then everything's fine. But yet behind it all is terrible, terrible things going on. So really, the whole world is in a bit of a mess. And we can ask ourselves, why is this happening? You know, where is God in all of this? How do I fit into this? What is happening? Well, the account of Genesis tells us, gives us the answer to the whys. Genesis starts off with the creation story in Genesis 1, telling us how God created all parts of the world. And then it takes us into a different world because we pick a selection of people. We're going into the Garden of Eden, which God places man actually in the Garden of Eden, and there, in that smaller area, he gives Adam opportunities. At that particular stage, there was no wife on the scene, but she came through that particular movement into the Garden of Eden, and they both experienced the Garden of Eden. So the whole story that we're looking at from Genesis 1 to 3 is basically a single plot. It's an overall plot. It tells us about the creation, how God formed man, how he placed him in the garden, but unfortunately it ends with God expelling him from the garden. Not just expelling him, but making sure he can never ever get back into that garden. Genesis, from as far as we know, has been written by Moses, and that is the early tradition of the Jews, and it's the early tradition of the Christian Church. The book of Genesis was written by Moses. And its purpose has been described as a sermon to Israel. Israel is very important. It's not just something that happened there all those years ago. Israel is part of us. Our history as Christians comes from Israel. Our faith is from the Jews through to Abraham. And we should not forget that we, although as Christians, we are nevertheless a shoot of Israel. As Paul puts it, we are a wild olive from which we have been taken and we've been connected to a good olive, which originally was Israel. Unfortunately, they've been stripped from the olive for the moment, but they will return. But that is our situation, and we should always look back and think of that. That's why really the whole Bible is so important to us as Christians. It's not just the New Testament. If we don't understand the Old Testament, we're not going to fully understand the New Testament, because the whole thing is our history. It's about us. At this stage, the Jew wasn't onto the scene. God had planned for Adam and Eve. But we all know, well, at least I should think we all know, the history of Israel and how bad it was for them. And so as Moses received this, and he wrote this story, he would have probably been writing it for Israel to show them why they were experiencing such bad and terrible things, where God was in it, and how they actually fitted together in the whole story. Israel's experience was pretty bad, but yet if you conceptualise it and put it into our world today, it's sort of very similar. They were in slavery in Egypt for a good many years, 400 years. They were hard labour from dawn to dusk. No freedom to worship God. Their baby boys drowned in the River Nile in order so that they couldn't reproduce. Then God freed them from Egypt and they went through this terrible journey through the desert. Every day a burning sun, agonising thirst and murderous snakes. Moses later described this desert as a vast and dreadful desert, that thirsty and waterless land with its venomous snakes and scorpions. That's in Deuteronomy 8:15. And in this desert, every adult who had left Egypt died, except for Joshua and Caleb. It was a 40-year journey marked with graves, and within 40 years an entire generation had died. It wasn't a very happy situation for them, really, was it? Although one could look back and say that there was a lot of cause from themselves, yes, but it still wasn't a very happy situation. What happened to God's creation after all? Genesis 1 just finishes it off by saying that God had created all of these things, and he looked and saw that it was good. It was good. God's creation was good. Why was Israel suffering so badly, and why are we suffering so badly today? Often, when we come to look at the story of creation, we often take it about a battle with evolution. And then we go on to say, well, look, you know, I've gone through this. Who's this serpent that this story creates? It tells us about. Was he always crawling on his belly, or did he have legs? Why did he speak? And then how did evil come to be? Did God create evil? What's all that about? And those sort of similar things that we grab hold of, and in this present day, we have to ask those questions of ourselves all the time. For some reason, we get into this questioning, this reasoning. We need to understand everything as we go through life, or we cannot ally ourselves to it. But the Genesis account isn't there for that. It's there to tell us simple things. There is a creator God. You and I were created by God for his purpose, for his good pleasure. We understand that God was pleased with all that he created. His creation was good. Man and woman were created in the image of God. And we were created in order that we can have a relationship with the Creator God. But as that story unfolds, we see that we wanted to do it our way. We wanted to be gods. We weren't satisfied with all that God had given us. We wanted that bit more. We wanted to run our own lives ourselves. But when we come back to look at the creation account, we can see that it is not given to answer all of those questions that I've referred to, such as who is the serpent, etc., and as a battleground against evolutionists. It's not there for that purpose. When we consider the book of Genesis, especially those first 3 chapters, we should really ask ourselves, how did this book come into being? All right, it was written by Moses. But was Moses there when God created